Hey, my stinky unicorns. So, today I will be interviewing Bryan J Wells. Bryan J Wells is currently incarcerated. He's been incarcerated the last 25 plus odd years. And I decided to interview him and get his take, get his story, see what's going on. Before the interview begins, I'm going to read his story. A letter that he wrote and he sent out. And so yeah, you can take what you can from it, of course. And I would hope that you can draw your own conclusions. I would hope you would see his innocence, and if not, comment down below. Like, tell me what you think. So here goes his story, and then we'll get into his interview. In 2015, a national study noted 153 people who were on death row scheduled to be executed. We now know that innocent people have been put to death. Most innocent people, like myself, without help, will suffer from a lethal dose of incarceration until we die. How did I get here? Just imagine the picture painted that led to my wrongful conviction. Imagine the perjury, the faulty eyewitness identification. Imagine the maliciousness, prosecution, the government's use of a snitch as a witness. Right now, the country is in uproar. If the police will kill an innocent Black man, will they falsely arrest and convict us of murders we did not commit? When they have evidence of the real killer and who the real killers are. I've been living through this nightmare day after day for 25 long years. Now consider that there is an abundance of evidence, if properly investigated, could clear me of this crime, including DNA, which we all can pretty much agree with today's technology is irrefutable. Let me request that there is DNA evidence in my case, which can prove I had nothing to do with this crime. On the night in question, I never laid eyes on the victim. This is not just my story. This is my truth. I'm a 46-year-old, and my name is Bryan J Wells. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and on June 15th, 1995, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, I was arrested by a group of men at gunpoint. Today, later, June 17th, 1995, at approximately 1:20 in the morning, on one of these young men who dragged by two men under a streetlight and executed according to the eyewitness statements and testimony. So basically, sorry, that was a little scrambly, but basically, according to an eyewitness testimony, two men were seen dragging one young man under a streetlight and then shooting him. And that young man happened to be tragically, that was murdered, that was killed, happened to be Sammy Hicks Jr., who was 14 years old at the time. When this crime took place, I was on the other side of town, inside of a bar with my cousin, Matthew Robinson, and a friend, Andre Gale. We were drinking, dancing, and taking photographs until the bar announced last call. Outside the bar, we made small talk with a few people. I didn't know anyone being from New York, but my cousin Matthew knew several people. He was now a resident of Harrisburg. The one person I knew was a guy named Joey Leaks. He was behind the DJ booth inside the bar. We acknowledged each other. He lived in the same project where the young man, Sammy Hicks Jr., was murdered. Outside the bar, I spoke with a young white woman who was sitting in the car. When I asked what was her name, she told me to read her license plate as she pulled off. The license plate read Prime. Matthew, Andre, and myself proceeded to get into Andre's gray Maxima in an attempt to follow Miss Prime. Prime was gone. Unfortunately, we were headed in the same project as Cameron, Cameron Street projects. The same projects where 2 days prior, I was assaulted. The first thing we saw when we got there were police cars, police vans, and yellow tape. We had no idea what taken place, let alone a young man had been shot. We didn't live there. We were outsiders, but we knew some of the people. Of course, we asked, what happened? A young woman named Audrey Evans responded, Sammy got shot. Then a man named Nikia Jeffries, aka Pookie, approached my cousin Matthew aggressively and said, Pussy, you know what happened. Y'all shot my boy. I immediately jumped between the two and said, we didn't have shit to do with it. We just came from Fabs. Everyone crowded around us. My cousin, in poor taste, responded to Pookie's disrespect, saying, fuck those niggas. As they all know, he should have got what he got. The heated exchange between the witnesses, by at least 30 people, including the prosecution star witness, Keontae Hodge, and officer Jeffrey Shivra, who was the first officer to arrive and secure the crime scene. From that pivotal point, the finger was pointed in our direction. You have to understand the complication begins and ends with the three of us being from New York City. We literally just walked ourselves out of a bar and into a homicide investigation. Edna Green was a witness to the shooting. She was the first person to say, who else witnessed the shooting? She said the two people she saw committing the crime of one of the shooters was tall and the other was short. This is critical because Matthew, Andre, and myself are all approximately the same height. Also critical is the fact that prior to this argument with Nikia Jeffries, aka Pookie, no one implicated us. Edna Green told police 3 girls witnessed everything. 2 of them were 14-year-old friends of the victim, Keontae Hodge and Virginia Garcia. The third was an 18-year-old woman named Simone Brooks. This is important because I found it odd that I never seen a statement from Miss Brooks and she did not testify at trial. Why? Why wouldn't her testimony be just as reliable, if not more credible, considering her age? Keontae Hodge was the star witness. Her statement and child testimony contradicted itself. The police, the officer who secured the crime scene. 2, the lead detective in regards to her failure to identify Matthew Robinson and Andre Gale. 3, the coroner and pathologist. 4, the firearm expert and the ballistics specialist. So what does that mean? Hodges' initial statement to the police is that the people she allegedly saw committed this crime were Ted and Jay Black. Jay did the shooting. Then he came and ran and met up with Ted. I am the person she says is Jay. Here is the confusing part. My cousin Matthew Robinson is known as Ted. My cousin Matthew Robinson, I'll repeat it again, is known as Ted. My cousin Matthew Robinson is also known as Black. Even everyone in that community who knows him knows this. Not Keontae Hodge. She did not know any of us. Keontae with several other witnesses say that she saw 2 people drag the victim under his arm and under a streetlight where he allegedly shot at point blank range. And I am the person she allegedly witnessed fire several shots. The truth is, according to the forensic and trial testimony, that the pathologist by the pathologist. There was no evidence of close range fire. And according to the firearms expert, the victim was shot by two different weapons. Keontae stated and testified after the victim was shot, we allegedly returned to the scene 5 to 10 minutes later, and we ended up arguing with Nakia Jeffries, aka Pookie. This is important because the first officer to arrive on the scene, Officer Jeffrey Shivers, testified this argument occurred some 40 to 50 minutes after he secured the crime scene. Therefore, we would never return to the scene. We had arrived there for the first time after leaving the bar. We never laid eyes on the victim. We never saw Sammy Hicks that night. Remember those 153 men and women, mostly poor, Black, and Latinx, exonerated from death row? A brutal and horrific picture has been painted to ensure conviction. The same goes for us when we've been a plane of sentence to life in prison for murder we have not committed. In my case, after the argument with Pookie was broken up by Officer Jeffrey Shivers, as he headed our way, we got in our car and went to see a woman I met prior. Her name is Latasha Walters. Keep in mind, before this argument with Pookie and being accused of murder, I was at a bar drinking with my cousin and a friend. This was June 17th, 1995. In 2 days prior, that was June 15th, 1995, I was assaulted at gunpoint. So keep in mind, June 17th, this murder happened of Sammy Hicks Jr. June 15th, 2 days prior, Bryan J Wells was assaulted at gunpoint. On so this was June 17th, I'm sorry. So on the left side of my face was a huge butterfly band-aid, which was the result of the assaults. Several people pointed out that I had butterfly band-aids, not Keontae Hodge. Latasha asked me about the band-aids and whether or not I was in a fight. Speaking out loud and thinking about Pookie's accusations, I said to no one in particular, I need an alibi. Latasha Walters asked me, do you need an alibi? I immediately said no. I searched my pockets for a ticket stub because I had been to the movies earlier that night. I never laid eyes on the victim. I have no idea as to what time the crime was committed. Latasha and myself were dropped off at the motel. My cousin Matthew went home and was told by his girlfriend, Fatrina Mathis, that detective had been there moments earlier that day, looking to question him about a homicide. Matthew called our friend Andre and told him he, along with his girlfriend, were voluntarily going to the police station. Andre told him that he, along with his girlfriend, was violently going to the police station. Andre called me at the motel and told me that he was doing the same. So I hung up the phone and fell asleep, only to be woken by Detective Kevin R. Duffin and other police officers as they busted through the door, arresting Latasha and myself. At the station, they accused, questioned, and threatened the four of us in separate rooms for several hours. For no apparent reason, Detective Duffin kept saying, you know I'm going to fuck you, right? He repeated this to me several times. At this point, Andre Gale and myself had no criminal records. After the interrogation and threats, Duffin said he would release me if I agreed to four things: to have my picture taken to be used as a mugshot, to sign a consent to search and give him all of my clothing for GSR and DNA testing, to take a lie detector. I agreed to everything. However, he only took my picture and confiscated my clothing. Matthew, Andre, and myself were released and were leaving. We all could see Latasha in a row, handcuffed to a chair, crying. At trial, as Tasha was a witness for the prosecution, She testified there were things in her statement that she never said. She pointed to Detective Duffin saying he told her she was going to jail if she didn't tell them what they wanted to hear. Of course, Detective Duffin has a history of this practice. Her exact words at the trial, he kept hounding and hounding me. You know how they do? So I just told him what they wanted to hear. On June 20th, Duffin and detectives went to my cousin Matthew's house with the ruse of wanting to return my clothes. Matthew then brought my clothes where I was staying. Remember, I'm from New York, and I was in Harrisburg for a total of 5 days. Even after the initial rest, I didn't rest fully because I never laid eyes on the bed on the night he was killed. I was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Once again, my cousin, Matthew, and my friend, Andre Gale, went to the police station voluntarily. I was told by Detective Duffin that I was truly innocent. I would give a voluntary statement without a lawyer about my whereabouts on the night in question. To this very day, I stand by it. I've been in prison ever since 25 years, a quarter of a century of my life for a crime I did not commit. Remember that picture I painted to convert the innocent? From the day I was arrested, the publicity was sensational, inflammatory, and slanted toward conviction. Headlines read, "Teens killing drug related." The murder was so referred to as execution style. On June 21st, 1995, then Mayor Stephen R. Reed is quoted having said, "They wanted to send a message. This was premeditated and intentional murder." We never laid eyes on the victim. Matthews, Andre, and myself were at Fab's bar when this young man was tragically killed. The following people, if properly investigated and called as witnesses, could have verified this. Willie J. Nelson Jr. He was the photographer who took 3 Polaroid pics of Matthew, Andre, and myself inside of the bar on the dance floor. All of our attorneys have these pictures at trial, but none were introduced as expository, excuse me if I get this word wrong, evidence. And as indeed of Duffin interviewing Willie Nelson Jr. According to his notes and police report, he interviewed Willie Nelson Sr., who Duffin claims the father said his son did not take pics that night. If this was the truth, why didn't Duffin interview Nelson Jr.? Who was the photographer? The detective knew our alibi was solid, and he was hell bent on not being established, at least not by him. Tawana Potet. She was dancing with Matthew on the night in question. This was corroborated with alibi witness Triana Tenet, who testified she was a friend of the victim and his family. Tenet said she entered Fab's bar by 1 a.m. and Matthew and Andre were already inside. She said Matthew was dancing with a girl named Tawan Potet the whole time. And the reason she remembered this was because she said Matthew's girlfriend, Fratrina, and Tawana did not get along with each other. 3. Joseph Leaks. He was at Fab's bar the entire time we were there. He's a friend of the victim and his family. This information is documented. Detective Duffin knows this. Ann Lawson. Ann Lawson is the woman outside of Fab's bar with the license plate that read Prime. She's the woman outside that gave Duffin a statement. There, and she said she did remember having a conversation with me outside of Fab's bar as she sat in her car. This is important because Duffin was at trial. And was anything done to verify my statement? He answered empathetically, no. This is a lie because he clearly takes a statement from this woman, Ann Lawson. 5. Pookie Gaston. I had a brief conversation with this young lady outside of Fab's on the night in question. This information is also documented. Alice Chambers. She testified at trial. She was a friend of the victim and his family. She did not know me personally. She remembered seeing me, as well as Matthews and Andres at Fab's during the night in question. And I'm sorry, during the night the victim was killed. However, we never laid eyes on the victim. Also, according to Duffin's notes and police report, a woman named Teresa Johnson told him she saw two black males with guns in hand get into a two-door car after the crime was committed. She never gave a statement that I saw, and she never testified at trial. Why not? I guess what she saw did not match what Detective Duffin, Keontae Hodge, and Ted, don't forget, Black and Ted are the same person who was witnessed dancing with Tawana Potet the whole time. Finally, Simone Brooks, according to all eyewitnesses presented by the prosecution, was present when the crime occurred. Simone was 18, unlike the two other witnesses who were 14. Where is her statement? Why didn't she testify? Is it because she refuses to be part of what Detective Edna Green and Keontae Hodge were putting down? Would anyone like to know the truth about Edna Green and her role? My name is Bryan J Wells, and I have been wrongfully convicted of a tragic crime I had absolutely no involvement in. I never laid eyes on the victim the night he was murdered. There is DNA evidence that can help prove this. For 25 long years, a quarter of a century, I have been robbed of my freedom. I have been robbed by the chance to be a father to my son, who is now 28, and a grandfather to my granddaughter, who is now 2. Will you help me in pursuit to prove my innocence? I thank you in advance. May God bless you and keep you. A sincerely innocent man, Bryan J Wells. All right, guys. So you just heard Unicorns, Bryan J Wells' story. So now tune in to his interview.